Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It's episode 2557 of The Tom Woods Show with our old friend Auron MacIntyre of the Auron MacIntyre Show and the author of the book I am badgering you to read, The Total State. So go get that and then come back to this episode. But I just want to catch up with my fellow Floridian. It's okay for me to say that. You said that in the previous episode, right?
Oh, yeah. People know I'm a Florida man for sure.
Okay, yeah. So you're not in an undisclosed bunker or something like Dick Cheney, something like that.
No. I also haven't shot any friends on the face yet.
Okay. Well, these days it's, you've been tweeting a little bit about people who pose as our friends, but then as soon as the heat goes up, they're not really our friends. So anyway, I want to talk about just kind of what's been going on. I mean, we might have talked last week if it hadn't been for the hurricane. I realized that I had you and another Floridian lined up to talk to that week, and I wasn't able to talk to either one of you. But we came through that all right, so that's great to see. And let's dive in first with a news item from Chris Rufo about Kamala having apparently plagiarized a number of sections, maybe a dozen sections in a book of hers. And I'm just wondering about what you think about the significance of that. I mean, obviously she didn't write the book, like we all know that. So it really just means she had a lousy, sloppy ghostwriter, but she can't say that because that's even worse. Well, I didn't actually write that book. Sounds even worse. So I think generally, I assume she's just been ignoring that, which is what, in that situation, I think anybody would advise her to do.
Yeah, it's really a strange situation when it comes to politicians and books. Like you said, a lot of them obviously aren't writing them. They're contracting them out to ghost writers. And when you get one this sloppy, this lazy, who's just copy and pasting Wikipedia articles, then that's a tough break, I guess, for whoever they paid in that scenario. It's not surprising. Rufo has got a lot of mileage, and I think rightfully so, out of the fact that academia is full of people who plagiarized their work. And there, the impact is a lot more important because ultimately these people are writing on these credentials, this idea that they're an expert in this area. The subject matter is what makes them and elevates them. And it's not surprising that in an era of DEI, where you had to slot everybody into these different positions, whether they were qualified or not, that a large percentage of the people who were chosen on the basis of their skin color may not have done all the work that other people may have done to get to the positions they were in. When it comes to Kamala Harris, no one's really looking at Harris and thinking, well, that's somebody who's a bright bulb. That's really somebody who is going to cure cancer or redesign the modern state. This is not things that people assume about Kamala Harris. It's a good political hit. I think it's effective to a certain degree, but I struggle to see any person who is like, I was deep in the bag voting for Harris, but then I found out her ghostwriter copy and pasted some of a book I was never going to read, and now I've decided I'm voting for Orange Hitler. Like, I don't see that happening. So it's a quality, political move. It's something you should do, going through the motions, exposing this, but I doubt it's going to shift any polls.
Right. I mean, at most, what I think it does is it adds to the cumulative set of pieces of evidence about her that the marginal voter is considering. And so, you don't know how many of those you need before finally, like that arcade game with the quarters on the edge, like which is the one that's going to actually make them all fall down, but this is one more, it's one more little like toothpick on your little tower. I couldn't help thinking when hearing about this about Pat Buchanan, because Pat wrote all his own books. You can tell, you can read his prose. Now, he was a columnist, he was a speechwriter. It would be shocking if he didn't write his own books. But so did Richard Nixon. You can tell, again, if you read any book by Richard Nixon, that is obviously him. There is no ghostwriter involved. But that is very, very much the exception. But it meant that when Pat was running, he was delivering brilliant speeches that nobody wrote except him. No outsider wrote. And that is such a rare thing. Now, Trump occasionally delivers a speech that is obviously pre-prepared, but it's written by heaven, I don't know who the speechwriters would be. But most of the time he just gets up there and riffs spontaneously. But in general, it's incredible that we've been reduced to the point where it's extremely impressive when somebody produces his own material.
Yeah, I mean, there's unfortunately just a degradation when it comes to statesmanship in the United States. And it makes sense overall. You're not really selecting for intellectual firepower. You're selecting for people who can do sound bites on camera and, look good in a suit. And unfortunately, it also really doesn't matter. I mean, I always think back to this clip between Alan Keyes and Barack Obama debating. And Alan Keyes runs Barack Obama around. It's comical. Like, he makes him look like a complete idiot. And Keyes didn't win. Obama becomes president. Ultimately, the fact that Keyes is operating at a standard deviation above Barack Obama, who isn't a stupid guy at the end of the day, that doesn't sway the election. And we can make the same case, sadly, about Pat Buchanan as well. Ultimately, that's not what wins you the game of democratic politics, which is why so many people tend to focus on the team around the person elected as opposed to that. Now, Trump is a great comedian. He really is one of the great stand-up comedians of our time. And that gives him a certain amount of ability, like you said, to riff, to be spontaneous. He's not constantly slave to the teleprompter the way someone like Harris is. But that doesn't mean he's also, I don't know how much of the art of the deal he wrote, but I ultimately wouldn't imagine that he's publishing a lot of position papers on foreign policy either.
I don't think I'll ever forget that time he gave out Lindsey Graham's phone number. You remember that? He was saying, you know what, let's call him. And they obviously later became friends, and he just gave the number out just like that. He said, let's give him a call. Just in a press conference. Just wild. But I will say, you mentioned, we mentioned Pat briefly, and that Pat didn't win. And you're right, Ron Paul didn't win. And that just reminds me, Auron, the best line ever uttered on the Tom Woods Show was by Pat Buchanan. Because we were talking about Trump, and Pat was, I don't know, maybe critical about one strategic point or something. And he said, but we do have to be humble enough to remember that Donald Trump is sitting in the White House and I am on the Tom Woods Show. And I thought, no argument
not that
there.
It's not an honor, but
So what I did before inviting you on today is I did something that I normally do somewhat haphazardly. I see your content on Twitter as it shows up in my feed, but you are one of a handful of people whose Twitter feed I sometimes just go to, not organically. I type in your name and I just go and I read through the feed. Michael Malice is another person I do that for, because I know I will be entertained by his Twitter feed for all kinds of different reasons. And you said something like this. Now, we've all seen that meme where it's a bell curve and you have people of low education, let's say, on one side, and people who are really grounded and sound and intelligent in the best sense, like learned, knowledgeable. And then in the middle, you have the midwits, basically. You have people who are not nearly as smart as they think they are, who have a smarmy, know-it-all attitude when they don't know anything, really. What they know is a bunch of things that were put into their heads, either by the TV or in some cases by universities. And so they've got some nuanced take on whatever the thing is. Like the guy with the low education level has an opinion, and they've got all these caveats to make about it in the middle. And then the really sound-based guy has basically the same opinion, perhaps more well-founded, but the same opinion as the other guy. And so you wrote the following. You said, the smartest people in the most prestigious institutions failed on COVID and were wrong on transgender ideology. The lower IQ individuals rejected the vax, rejected being locked in their homes, rejected the mutilation of children. The collective generational wisdom of tradition proved more robust than all the concentrated IQ of the academy. This should have some basic impact on how one sees the world. I feel like you could write a book on that.
And maybe, hopefully, one day I will. I mean, ultimately, the problem that we have is we like to tell ourselves the story about how we're very modern and advanced people. And ultimately, we have arrived at all of our positions through science and reason. And this is what makes us superior to all the people that came before. Of course, that's not what happened at all. We didn't suddenly just throw away those silly religious beliefs and those silly traditions and embrace the scientific method. We just replaced our priests with a new priestly caste. We just gave credentials in the university the air of unimpeachable truth that we once gave to people who were promoting religious doctrine. And this is how most people live their lives. While we're citing memes, I'm sure you've seen the one cartoon where the guy is traveled back into the past and there's 30 people standing around him and he's telling them about the wonders of electricity and all the amazing things his civilization can do. And they're like, oh, great. How do we make this electricity? He's like, I don't know. Right? like he's not advanced. He's not smarter than any of these people. He just came from a time where a handful of people provided him a way of life he could not replicate, did not understand, had no ability to maintain. And when he's moved out of that context, couldn't do that anymore. And so the problem we have now is that so many people are, bought in religiously in a very real way to this scientific epistemology. This is the only way we can understand things. This is the only way we can gain knowledge. This is the only way that we can validate truth. And when you buy into this, then you are very subject to the corruption of those institutions. Now, this is true of every knowledge base, but the beauty of tradition is that it has to iterate itself successfully across generations in order to be encoded, right? Like this knowledge to be something that we rely on deeply has to prove itself in one way or another to be successful and, in my opinion, of truth, therefore true, across many different sets in many different situations. And so it's very difficult to rapidly change it. That's what a lot of our top-down social engineers hate about tradition, is that it impedes their ability to do things like lock everybody in their homes and lie to them about a disease in order to take control of the world when they have that opportunity. And so the point is ultimately that people who are watched what happened, have watched this scientific understanding of the world create some of the dumbest things we've ever seen, pretending, that men can become women, something that a 13th century peasant would easily be able to tell you is absolutely false and would be far more correct than someone at Johns Hopkins. The fact that in multiple cases, we have seen the entire academy, the entire intellectual apparatus, medical, all these things that were supposed to be untouchable, even by wokeness, all of them run away and make these assertions. That should impact how we understand knowledge. It should say to us, maybe there are ways to understand truth that are not just, the deductive reasoning based on some kind of scientific hypothesis. But unfortunately, we have bought into this religiously as the kind of, and the more you are connected to the system, the more you rely on those credentials to be elevated above your peers, the more this affects you, which is why all the dumb people were right and all the smart people were wrong. It's not that the dumb people had access to some kind of knowledge that the smart people didn't. It's just that they were not, their status was not dependent and elevated on a system that is in no way grounded in long-term wisdom. And so I think that's the big thing that people should take away from this. So we need to ground these things in other bases of knowledge. We should not solely pretend that having a credential somewhere is the only thing necessary and the only way in which we can arrive at truth.
Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you are getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you are a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. Or what if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking, meeting places getting shut down? Use your website as a lead generation engine. Or what if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO's expert search engine optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. I had the opportunity last week to be on Candace Owens' podcast, and she's been very opposed to what I call scientism. She's not saying science has no value. She's saying that viewing it as, or treating it like a religion, as a doctrine, is a problem, and particularly the implicit idea that a lot of people have that the only really valuable knowledge is the kind that comes out of a test tube. But yet those very same people who privilege so-called scientific knowledge in this way believe all kinds of things that you could not prove through a test tube. For example, they purport to believe in egalitarianism. But there's no test tube that's going to tell you that all human beings are quote unquote equal. And first of all, what does the term even mean? That's a philosophical question that could never come through a test tube. But this is something they believe with religious fervor. So it shows they themselves understand that there are philosophical commitments that you can have that are perfectly well-grounded. You have every reason to believe in them. Or you can, they believe a lot of dumb things, but you can believe a perfectly good philosophical argument that does not involve test tubes. Now, this matter of your tweets about, we were talking about the masses and the way they look at things, and the way the university professors do. And, I hate to generalize, but, in this day and age, that's a pretty good generalization. So one of the questions that Murray Rothbard asked was, who really, in the grand scheme of things, is the villain? Is it the power elite, or is it the unwashed masses, with their irrational demands? And here's what he had to say, and I wonder if I could just read a quick passage and have you share your thoughts about it. He says, who are the major bad guys, the unwashed masses or the power elite? Very early, I concluded that the big danger is the elite and not the masses, and for the following reasons. First, even granting for a moment that the masses are the worst possible, that they are perpetually hell-bent on lynching anyone down the block, the mass of people simply don't have the time for politics or political shenanigans. The average person must spend most of his time on the daily business of life, being with his family, seeing his friends, etc. He can only get interested in politics or engage in it sporadically. The only people who have time for politics are the professionals, the bureaucrats, politicians, and special interest groups dependent on political rule. They make money out of politics, and so they are intensely interested and lobby and are active 24 hours a day. Therefore, these special interest groups will tend to win out over the uninterested masses. This is the basic insight of the public choice school of economics. The only other groups interested full-time in politics are ideologists like ourselves, again, not a very large segment of the population. So the problem is the ruling elite, the professionals, and their dependent special interest groups. Is that, even if you wouldn't argue it precisely that way, is that more or less the way you see things?
Oh, yeah. I work in what a lot of people call elite theory, the Italian elite school, and when it comes to political analysis. And the entire point of several of those people, all the way from guys like James Burnham to Vilfredo Pareto and Gaetano Mosca, is that there is always a ruling class, and those ruling elites are actually what defines your society. The story of most societies we think of, no one knows the name of random Roman peasants, but they all know Julius Caesar, they all know Nero, they all know the ruling elite in Scipio Africanus. Like these are the people that they know when we tell the story of these civilizations. And this isn't to say that the people don't have an important role to play in all of this, but ultimately it is the organized minority that always leads the disorganized majority. And this is something that I try to tell people on a regular basis. They're one of the saddest things about some of the people who want to be leaders on the right is the one thing they take from the leadership we have now is that they should hate the masses. They should hate the people. That it's ultimately a vulgar disgust for the common man that separates you and makes you an elite. But of course, that's not the case. Actually, what you really need to do is understand the needs and desires of people. And even if they're wrong, even if ultimately they're unhealthy. It doesn't mean you have to do everything that they want to do, but you need to understand where they are and where they live and their character if you have any interest in ultimately improving it. And so you can sit around and say, oh, well, it's the people, but this is, I think, one of the huge failings of particularly democracy, is all we hear is, oh, well, they voted for it. The people voted for it. Well, the vast majority of the time, no, they didn't. Most of them didn't vote. And when they did vote, they voted for candidates who lied to them or, ended up proving to be untrustworthy. And even if they did vote for people who they trusted and vote for the positions they wanted, oftentimes those people turn around and end up getting outwiled by the system, which ends up turning around whatever they were trying to do and bringing it back in, consuming it, making it part of the machine. So ultimately sitting around and focusing on the vast majority of people rather than focusing on where power is actually concentrated is a failure to understand the realities of the political mechanism.
When we talk about the masses, though, I think we have to be honest with ourselves. We're talking about a particular kind of person within the masses, because aren't the masses also all the people you run into at the mall who have obviously bought into the latest, every single left-wing fad the TV tells them to buy into?
For sure. There's, of course, a overlap here between propagandizement and the fact that the masses genuinely end up following a particular plan, right? And so the people we saw pushing back against COVID, it wasn't just the general population. There were a lot of people that went along. That's why the social force was what it was. But the thing that we did, and I just actually had Jeffrey Tucker on, we were talking about this during the pandemic. The people that reliably pushed back were communities of faith, were communities that had a higher power, something else that they adhered to first. They were deep in their traditions. They had a commitment to something that mattered beyond government ideology. And those people aren't necessarily always, the most educated. They're not all doing their own research and coming up with the science. But what they knew ultimately is that there were things that were more important than what the government said. And there are things that are more important even than their own safety. And that ultimately they were going to pursue those goals and continue that way of life, no matter what some guy with a piece of paper on television told them to do. Now, that's not the behavior of the majority of people. Majority of people are sitting around with a mask on, inside their car, doing, taking the ninth shot, whatever. But, for those that did resist, they still were not doing so because they had, the intellectual rigor of their evaluation of, epidemiology. They were doing so because they knew a fundamental truth that had been iterated across generations and transmitted to them in a valuable system that actually coheres societies. And ultimately, that's why we need those forces in society, because they are the safeguards that, that help people, especially those amongst the common people who would embrace them. They are the things that guide them even when their leaders decide to do something foolish.
Let me change the subject a bit. Can you tell people what is meant by the term intellectual dark web?
Sure. If you remember, at the kind of as wokeness was becoming a thing, right? When we called this political correctness, was sweeping college campuses and people were getting canceled, and the college. I don't know if you remember the college rape crisis and Mattress Girl, and all of these stories were coming out. And as these different forces were canceling people, there was a collection of kind of mostly leftists, but a few moderately conservative people. A lot of I didn't leave the left left me types is the people who, they were very comfortably ensconced in the academy or in jobs where they were elevated and very visible because of their progressive beliefs. But all of a sudden, kind of their status shifted because the new trend was towards this idea that men and women aren't real, and we should abandon biological realities, and we should ignore basic truths. And so all of a sudden, they just found themselves, they had fallen off the tip of the sphere. They were no longer the key part of the revolution, and they, as all good failed revolutionaries, they decided to migrate their way a little more to the right. They went through what I call the neocon cycle. And a group of these people were coined by Barry Weiss, who was at, I believe, the New York Times at the time, as the intellectual dark web, as guys like Joe Rogan and Brett and Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris and an extended universe of this started to come out with like James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. And these people, again, were just really temporarily embarrassed leftists who kind of made common cause with conservatives against this enemy of wokeness. And what has happened over the years is guys like Jordan Peterson have moved a little further right, but most of them have moved back to the left. And we've ended up in this very strange scenario where, a few of them stayed refugees from the system, but guys like Sam Harris just flew off the handle and sprinted back to the left. And so we have this kind of diaspora of the IDW, where they're not really sure where they land, but many of them have tried to become leaders in the conservative movement, and that's created a lot of friction between them and those of us who kind of recognize that what they're asking for is really just 1990s liberalism at best.
Yeah, that's kind of been my experience. It's not to say they have no value. And that's not what you're saying. I mean, they brought some interesting things to the table, but for one thing, I find it weird that you would have let's say a realization like this, that wait a minute, maybe I'm ideologically, I don't seem to belong with the people I've been associating with, and maybe I should move, that you would then position yourself as indeed not only a leader, but somebody who can excommunicate others, which I've started to see that, well, we can't allow these ideas on the right because of X, Y, and Z. Well, says who? Says a guy who's been over here for 2 years? I mean, you would think you'd have the decency, not that anyone has humility anymore in the age of the internet, Auron, but you'd think you'd have the humility to shut up for a couple of years at least. Shut up and learn, read, acclimate yourself with your, to your new environment before you go trying to put your own imprint on it.
Someone who is the right example of this and who I have a lot of respect for is Carl Benjamin, known as Sargon of Akkad from his YouTube vid-days. And
I'd love to get him back on if you can help me.
Absolutely.
I tried writing to him. I never heard back.
Yeah, we'll get that fixed after this. But Carl is somebody who called himself a liberalist. I don't know if you remember this. He started a whole party and a whole movement. I'm going to take back the left. It's going to be reasonable and rational again. I can't stand this intersectional feminism, but we're going to go back to kind of new atheism, the heyday of this. And over time, Carl has legitimately become right-wing. Like he has shifted his priors. It's not just my team is no longer backing me, and so I need some more guys, but I still believe all the things I used to believe. He has looked into the philosophy he once believed in. He has looked into the ideology that he once stood for, and he said, no, I was wrong. And I have had a change of heart. I have looked at this from the ground up, and I am shifting the way I live my life, the way I encourage others to live, and the way I view the world, because I was wrong about the foundations of the world. And that is something that almost none of these other guys do. I mean, let's just be blatant here. Guys like James Lindsay and Konstantin Kisin have come out with this like woke right nonsense. They've personally attacked me, created James Lindsay, in his case, has created some kind of weird cult that I'm a leader of that's summoning an archangel. I'm not kidding. This is all, available for those who would like to see it on Twitter. Like, these people have deranged themselves because they were in this scenario where, like we said, they had to leave the left, but they didn't actually believe they did anything wrong. They think the left the other people went crazy. There's nothing wrong with their belief system. There's no core assumptions built into their ideology that they need to actually reevaluate. They were just always right, and they're still right, and they're still standing in the place where they should be, and now the whole world has shifted around them. And when they do that, they think, oh, well, then I see actual right-wing beliefs. Now, not like, oh, we should lower taxes, but like, no, there's a particular way that we should understand morality and the world. There's a certain way that we should lead people. There's a certain way that we should view the legislation, all these things. And they say, oh, no, this is crazy. I don't want this either, because ultimately they're still leftists. That's still what they believe. And so now, like you said, they're spending their time canceling people. You won't see that from someone like Carl, because Carl actually evaluated his belief system and changed things. As where someone like James Lindsay or Konstantin Kisin, they're just arrogant, dejected leftovers from the liberal movement, and they don't know how to handle that. And so all they know how to do is use the exact tactics that they decried the left for using now on their enemies on the right, and pretending like it's somehow different because they threw woke in front of it.
Hey, everybody, this is not a sponsor message. I just wanted to remind you, first of all, that my Christmas party is coming up December 7th, It's about 35 minutes southeast of the Orlando airport, and it's a wonderful time. A chef prepares dinner for everybody in our own kitchen. I have several minor celebrities who are going to be coming, and it's just a wonderful night to get to know a lot of really great people. You can be yourself. You don't have to watch what you say, and everybody raves about it. So I hope you can attend. It's a benefit enjoyed by members of my Supporting Listeners program. Now, I have supported people on Patreon in the past, and I've been very happy to do so. But supportinglisteners.com beats the heck out of any Patreon you've ever contributed to. Because how many of those people are inviting you to a Christmas party? Or how many, instead of having you look at a godforsaken screen 24 hours a day for their content, are also mailing you in the physical mail a print newsletter like this one, 16 pages. This one's 20 pages. You get that in the physical mail, and it's not just the same things I send in my email newsletter. It's all fresh content, not seen anywhere else, just for you, nice and hot. So for a change, you can be old school. Remember, we were old school, right? We liked reading physical things. Well, ain't no podcaster or any Patreon sending you a physical newsletter, or for that matter, inviting you to a murder mystery dinner party for free. I have several of them lined up for around the country with many more to come. The one in New Orleans still has plenty of spots available, and you can pay to attend these murder mystery dinner parties, but you don't have to. Just be a supporting listener of the Tom Woods Show. You get that for free. Not to mention my censorship-free Tom Woods Show elite group. It is the best possible supporters program in the world, and you're part of a community that you just can't beat. So check it out at supportinglisteners.com, and before you know it, you will be holding in your hands one of these right here. Supportinglisteners.com, and thank you very much. This term woke right is so dumb that it rivals anything the left has come up with in its utter stupidity. Now, Dave Smith has treated this pretty well. He says, if anything, if we're going to use a term like woke right, it applies to these people more than anything else, because they become wildly hysterical when people utter forbidden thoughts. Okay, well, that checks a box. They throw the term anti-Semitism around every bit as recklessly as the left-wing woke people throw racist and everything else around. So we have that. They are. I could go on with this, but what makes people woke is a series of commitments they have that maybe they haven't made explicit, but I would say that one of them that they share is that if there are found to be differences between groups in anything from income to employment opportunities to educational attainment, if there are differences between groups, these differences have sinister origins. They can never have innocent origins. They must mean that there are perpetrators of this. Now, that's what I think somebody like a James Lindsay is trying to pull things out of wokeism to make it sound like his opponents are just like the woke. We don't hold any of these ideas. Well, how does a woke person look at Christopher Columbus? We don't look at Christopher Columbus that way. So it's dumb to say that because we are really their opposite, we're kind of like them. Like, what is this?
It's ultimately, as you point out, the fact that these people are still leftists. They don't see a problem with leftism. Their only problem is leftism's natural conclusion. So what James Lindsay or Konstantin Kisin like is liberalism 1.0. They don't understand why it has to become liberalism 2.0. The answer is very simple. And again, this is why I respect Carl Benjamin. He's gone down to, the foundation and stripped it open and seen the truth about this, that these beliefs naturally lead one to another, that you cannot believe in the blank slate egalitarianism and not assume that then all differences have to be systemic. That is a natural way for this kind of thing to flow. To be fair, many conservatives buy into this because ultimately they are themselves also liberal, right? Like, they don't have a good explanation. If you ask the average conservative, well, why do different demographic groups reliably produce different results across multiple things like IQ tests or, the ability to get in, to pass a test for a firefighter or a police officer. And their answer is maybe something like, well, it's, socioeconomic differences. Well, okay, if we adjust for that, if we control for that, actually we see that the gap remains the same. So that can't be the case. And that's kind of the end of it. It's done. We don't talk about that anymore. And so, that understanding of kind of human anthropology is just baked into the liberal mindset. And because they have this basic false understanding of human nature, it brings them to bad conclusions, whether it's only the first stage of those conclusions, which are contained in what most people call classical liberalism, or really bad versions of it like communism. But James Lindsay can call himself a classical liberal all he likes. He's not. Like, sorry, but ultimately John Locke would throw James Lindsay down a well. Like John Locke specifically said, you can't trust atheists. You should never let them hold public office. They are immoral people that cannot be trusted. Like, these are basic statements that no new atheist would be able to assent to, but they are part of something that the foundational work of classical liberalism, the work of guys like John Locke, would have agreed with. So even their understanding of liberalism is incorrect. They believe in several iterations of liberalism beyond classical liberalism, but they just didn't go all the way to wokeness. And so that's their problem. All of the intellectual genealogy is still there and still impacting their thought.
I brought this up because you wrote something recently about one of the members of this group, and it's an informal, as you say, it was somebody else kind of gave them this designation, but you say that one of their issues is they think that politics is more of an intellectual exercise than it really is. Like, look at my bundle of policy proposals as opposed to your bundle of policy proposals, and here's this study that a foundation wrote that says that mine will do 10% better than the other person's. And you're saying that it's not like that. And if that's true, how does that change how somebody, in your estimation, ought to run a successful campaign?
Well, politics, as you point out there, is not a rational contest. It's not you and I make the best argument in the marketplace of ideas. If it was, as we've already noted, Pat Buchanan and Rand Paul would be running the show, but they're not. So we need to answer that question. Like, why does Barack Obama get the assent and Alan Keyes doesn't? Why do all these smart people, if politics is just an IQ test, if it's just who can build the best rational case, then why aren't these people the people in charge? And the answer is that ultimately politics is a nexus of several things, including, most importantly, identity. We hear a lot from many people, including, those who would like to avoid many unsavory topics, both on left and the right. We conclude ultimately, that tribalism is bad, and that the point of humanity is to banish tribalism and embrace, this kind of intelligent discussion. That's what actually will drive human beings forward. But the thing about the human condition, and this is the value of what Thomas Sowell called the tragic view of the human condition, is that it allows you to understand that ultimately, while you can change some things about humanity, you can make things better, you should do what you can to make human existence better. Ultimately, there are some things that simply cannot be ameliorated. Sam Francis, in his book Leviathan's Enemies, made an excellent point for that the reason ultimately that our current regime, our managerial regime, will fail is that it has a understanding of the human condition that is just fundamentally wrong. It believes that through kind of this therapeutic state, you can eventually just change the way that humans work, and that will ultimately lead you into this utopia. But what we recognize over and over again is actually utopias never come into being. That top-down social management doesn't actually change human nature. And especially when it doesn't account for human nature or assumes that it can alter human nature, it usually ends up burying millions of people somewhere in unmarked graves. And that's ultimately what these people need to understand, is that, when you're talking about politics, when you're running a campaign, what you're doing is appealing to people's sense of belonging and what they see as their collective future. And if you're not doing that, if instead you're kind of just trying to, figure out the exact correct marginal tax rate to bring up the GDP, then you're going to fail. Not that those things don't matter. It's not that intellect has no place. It's not that no person has ever been won over by an intellectual argument. But when you're think about mass politics, when you're trying to move the mass man, if your primary way to do that is through, intellectual pursuit, rather than understanding that what you're dealing with is a rhetoric of identity and future and purpose, then you're going to fail when it comes time. And that's why Donald Trump is just way more effective than most Republican politicians, because he touches on this in a way that, Mitt Romney was never going to.
Do you think men in general are becoming more right-wing?
Yeah, absolutely. If for no other reason than they have to survive. I'm going to be doing something on this soon. I'll probably do a full episode on this soon. But you see that the Harris campaign is absolutely panicking right now with their poll numbers when it comes to men, even black men, which they assumed were like in the bag for them because, Democrats have pretty much a monolithic voting rate in that, a stronghold in that demographic. But they're recognizing that this is failing. So they've been trotting out like Tim Walz, who like doesn't know how to load a shotgun, looks like Elmer Fudd tripping over himself going hunting. And, they're doing terrible commercials with super effeminate guys pretending like, it's the Yellowstone conservative meme, a guy sitting on a truck with, his hands daintily sitting on his thigh, telling you about how he's man enough to eat steak and vote for, Kamala Harris. It's a cartoon of what effeminate men and when women think a man might want to hear.
Isn't that so interesting to watch how they devise images of what they think we are? It's a dumb example, but when I was growing up in the 80s, one of the most popular shows was Family Ties, and that's where Michael J. Fox grew to stardom and then was in the Back to the Future movies. And he was supposed to play a young conservative. And by his bedstand, he had a portrait of Richard Nixon, because that's what they thought a young conservative would have, because Nixon was a Republican, so he probably would have a portrait of Nixon. And I just thought, they have even then have absolutely no idea what motivates us, who inspires us, who we read. I mean, nothing.
They didn't even know it actually should have been a Metallica poster. But yeah, the ability for them to understand this is very difficult. They don't have a theory of mind. And to be fair, there's always this kind of this feminist critique of literature, that men can't write women. And so they're always writing these cartoonish depictions of women. But we can obviously see that at least that runs the other direction, because Democrats are so out of step with what a man even looks like. And that's because they've basically demonized being a man. They've said men are worthless, that all male behaviors should be driven out of society, that men are the ones that are violent, that men are the ones who disrupt society. And ultimately, they're the ones that need to change everything about themselves to become basically better women. And that's how you solve all social problems. And they're surprised that after telling men, well, really, we don't care if you can get married or have kids or get a good job or get an education. We're going to hand out all of these benefits to others and make sure that ultimately you don't matter. And if you drop out of society and you fail and you die from some death of despair, we don't really care. That's fine. You're worthless. They're surprised that after saying this and making this a core part of their platform for a decade, at least at this point, they're having trouble getting men to vote for them. But should be pretty obvious why.
All right. Well, I think I will, I'll wrap things up here and tell people that there is an Auron MacIntyre show. So if you like his appearances on the Tom Woods Show, once you're done with your Tom Woods Show episodes for the week, there's also the Auron MacIntyre show. And you should follow him on Twitter as I do, because you will be entertained and informed. Now, is there a particular link you want to give out?
Just the classics, the shows on Blaze TV, YouTube, Rumble. You can get the podcast on your favorite podcast platforms. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Substack.
All right. Excellent. Well, Auron, thanks so much for your time. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of the Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.